The political storm engulfing Labour this week reveals far more than a simple policy disagreement. It exposes a leadership struggling to balance principle with pragmatism, and a party increasingly at odds with itself. At the center of this maelstrom sits Sir Keir Starmer, whose carefully constructed image of competent authority is being tested like never before. The controversy over local grooming gang inquiries has become a lightning rod for broader frustrations, both within Labour's ranks and among the public it seeks to govern. Subscribe now for unflinching political analysis that cuts through the Westminster noise. This crisis began with what Labour strategists assumed would be a routine adjustment to their approach on child protection. The decision to scale back local inquiries in favour of relying on the existing national framework seemed, to the leadership, a sensible streamlining of resources. But in politics, timing and symbolism often outweigh administrative logic. The move came just as survivors' groups were ramping up pressure for more localised accountability, and as Conservative MPs began highlighting Labour's vulnerability on law and order issues. What followed was not just criticism from expected opponents, but something far more damaging: open rebellion from within Labour's own benches. The scale of discontent became clear when private WhatsApp exchanges between Labour MPs were leaked to the Times. These messages showed not just frustration with the policy itself, but with how it had been communicated and defended. Councillor Dan Aldridge's question cuts to the heart of the matter: how can we claim to stand for communities when we won't let them have their own inquiries? This wasn't merely about process, but about perception. In constituencies where trust in institutions is already fragile, Labour's position looked like another example of distant elites making decisions without understanding local realities. Jess Phillips' attempt to dismiss the backlash as politically motivated only poured fuel on the fire. Her suggestion that concerns were being amplified by Reform UK activists missed a crucial point: genuine victims and their advocates were equally dismayed. When backbencher Antonia Barnes reported hundreds of angry emails from constituents, it became impossible to frame this as manufactured outrage. The numbers tell their own story. In the 48 hours following the policy announcement, Labour's private polling in key marginal seats showed a 7-point drop on questions about trust in handling community safety issues. Midway through this unfolding drama, it's worth pausing to ask, how did Labour's leadership so badly misread this situation? Subscribe if you're finding this breakdown valuable as we analyse the deeper currents beneath this crisis. The government's position, articulated firmly by Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, rests on three main arguments. First, that the 7-year national inquiry provides comprehensive recommendations. Second, that additional local investigations would duplicate effort and delay implementation. Third, that resources are better spent on frontline services than more inquiries. On paper, these points have merit. But politics rarely operates on paper. The reality is that in towns like Rotherham and Rochdale, the national inquiry's broad brushstrokes failed to address specific institutional failures that allowed abuse to persist for years. Survivors' advocates point to glaring gaps in the current approach. Maggie Oliver, the former detective-turned-whistleblower, notes that only 12 of 43 police forces have implemented all the National Inquiry's recommendations. Meanwhile, conviction rates for grooming offences vary wildly by region, from 42% in West Yorkshire to just 28% in parts of the Midlands. This patchwork of justice creates precisely the postcode lottery Labour claims to oppose. When a survivor from Bradford asks why her town's particular failures haven't been examined, citing the council's documented reluctance to investigate Asian gangs for fear of appearing racist, no reference to a national report will satisfy her demand for answers. The political consequences are becoming clear. In the Blackpool South by-election, Conservative leaflets prominently featured Labour's inquiry U-turn alongside images of grooming gang victims. While this drew accusations of exploitation, it also moved the needle. Labour's lead narrowed by 11 points in the final week before voting. More worrying for Starmer are murmurs from traditionally loyal quarters. 3 trade unions have privately expressed concerns about the policy's impact on Labour's working-class credentials. One senior union official put it bluntly: you can't claim to stand for the vulnerable while ignoring their calls for justice. This brings us to the fundamental tension at play. Labour's leadership sees itself as preparing for government, making tough choices about priorities and resources. But politics is as much about narrative as it is about policy. The grooming gang inquiry issue has become a proxy for broader questions. Does Labour truly understand the concerns of its traditional base? Is it willing to make uncomfortable stands when principle conflicts with political calculation? However the party resolves this specific controversy, these larger questions will linger. As we look ahead, several scenarios emerge. Labour could stage a careful retreat, announcing supplementary local reviews while maintaining the primacy of the national framework. This might calm immediate dissent but risks appearing reactive rather than decisive. Alternatively, they could hold firm, betting that other issues will dominate by the general election. But this carries the danger of the narrative hardening, that Labour cares more about bureaucratic neatness than justice for victims. The third path, and perhaps the most perilous, would be a full reversal, which might please critics but cement an image of weak leadership. The stakes extend beyond this single issue. Starmer has built his leadership on discipline and competence. This crisis tests both. When backbenchers openly defy the whip on moral grounds, discipline frays. When a policy announcement triggers days of damaging headlines and internal strife, competence is questioned. These are the moments that define political leaders, not the scripted set-piece events, but the unplanned storms where instinct and judgment are laid bare. Subscribe for continuing coverage as this story develops. The coming days may determine whether this becomes a temporary setback or a turning point in Labour's journey to power. Consider this. If Labour struggles to maintain unity on an issue where the moral imperative seems clear, how will it handle the infinitely more complex challenges of government? When constituents feel their concerns are being dismissed, how long before they dismiss the party in return? And crucially, in an age where trust in politics is already fragile, can any party afford to be seen putting process before people?